the poetics of your proposal. It's also nice to see that, coincidentally, Mark's project actually has a lot of resonance with yours. You're both looking at marginal communities, questions about what art is, the role of the artist, etc. So it's just fortuitous for us. We spoke this morning and we agreed that there's probably too much to talk about. So we're going to actually start by thinking about your proposals, your winning proposals, which very enigmatically and beautifully is framed as a pedagogical opera. And I thought I might start by asking you, there was an epigraph in the beginning of your proposal, and I just thought you might read it. It's a quote by Ralph Emerson. Yeah. So this was the first thing you went. And I thought I might start by asking you, there was an epigraph in the beginning of your proposal.
So this is a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. A college professor should be elected by setting all the candidates loose on a miscellaneous group of young men taken at large from the street. He who could get the ear of these youths after a certain number of hours should be the professor.
So immediately, there are a few things in there that very much resonate with your work. There's the question of the street, the miscellaneous group of young men, and then of course this vision of pedagogy, or traditional pedagogy, turned on its head. And there are at least two works that I thought we might sort of thread back to, that a lot of people in this room might be familiar with. One is My Best Thing, which debuted at Venice in 2011, and the other one is Osservate Leggete, I'm going to mispronounce it, Massimiliano can help me, Osservate Leggete con me, which means observe, read with me, and which happens to be, we'll be able to see that work tonight, so we'll use it as a point of reference. But both of these works are very much concerned with the question of pedagogy. And I mean, just a brief summary in case you didn't know the works. Both of them are built around sustained conversations that Frances had over a period of some months with a series of men around the world through the internet. She had both conversation and, to some degree, or occasionally, sex, just to reduce it to a one-liner. I just wanted one quote from My Best Thing. There's one character called Marcello, and he's an anarchist character with whom, Frances, you're having a sexual relationship of some sort, and he says to you, "I never had a professor like you." So again, this question of pedagogy I wanted to linger over and ask you to tell us a little bit about your proposed project. What is this pedagogical opera? And how is it an extension of, and also departure from these past works?
Well, the pedagogical aspect looms large precisely because I have been employed as a professor for approximately 10 years at a university in Los Angeles that is right smack dab in the middle of South Central. And I think that part of my effect or I guess success of teaching had a lot to do with being kind of the self-reflexivity about my own position of power and about where does my authority to teach come from and what is this mentor-mentee relationship really about. So when as things within the university got progressively more complicated, I think that I sort of escaped into the realm of this sort of private internet conversation where I could address myself as a sexualized, middle-aged female who has knowledge of various things from music to whatever, who can engage. You know, like I basically kind of just went on a kind of vacation and found that I couldn't be that I was still being myself and I was still deeply trying to analyze, like, what does a woman who is a thinker who makes art mean in the broader culture. Also, I was going to read the precise little bit within the proposal to hopefully, because I could work to articulate this, and if I try to say it off the top of my head, I won't be able to do it. So I'm just going to read a little paragraph. This is what followed from the Emerson quote. My dream project is to collaborate with the legendary West Coast rapper DJ Quick, a peer of Dr. Dre, to realize a tragicomic contemporary interpretation of Mozart's The Magic Flute. It is important to remember that at the time of its first staging, The Magic Flute was an unapologetic sexual innuendo that was also able to symbolize the highest Enlightenment ideals of the time. The project will be born out of an unlikely alliance between a former street thug who supported his early development as an artist selling crack cocaine in South Central around the same time that I was going $80,000 into debt pursuing an MFA degree across town with mentors such as Mike Kelly. Now we are both mature mid-career artists, somewhat disgruntled with our respective fields of practice, poised to unleash a fresh, bold experiment.
So it's interesting, and there's always, I find in your work there's always this interesting twinning of experience, or this sort of hyper-consciousness of your life and parallel lives. So what's happening in one part of Los Angeles, for example, and what's happening in an immediately adjacent one, which are radically different and surreal. And this sort of came to head with USC, where you used to teach, and you eventually did resign last year.
Yeah, I forgot there was another little section, and it's not in this little printout, but I did speak about that the project would be coming from this moment where I actually left my tenure position at the university because of certain upsetting administrative coups, which essentially decimated our small graduate program and wreaked havoc on the whole ethos of the place. And what ended up happening was there was I had already been working with this wonderful person. I call him a muse. He's sort of a student. He's a friend. He's a family member at this point. And we made this, his name is Bobby Jesus. I made a piece called Bobby Jesus' Alma Mater. In that, I'm talking about this intersection between the University of Southern California, or as people in Los Angeles jokingly refer to it as the University of Spoiled Children, versus the University of South Central, which is a way of saying I learned on the streets. So, and as you probably know, and if you didn't know, you know now because of the new movie that sort of historicizes NWA, Dr. Dre comes out of the streets in that radical fashion, but he ended up being a donor along with Jimmy Iovine through Beats Music to the art school, and it was that donation that was the catalyst for this great undoing of the art school. So,
and that manifested a work at the Carnegie International, which was called Bobby Jesus' Alma Mater, or Paying Attention is Free.
Yeah, Bobby Jesus' Alma Mater, backed with Reading the Book of David and or Paying Attention is Free. And Reading the Book of David refers to an album by DJ Quick called The Book of David, and it sort of implied and deals with this notion of reading rap as a kind of a medium or genre of writing.
Right.
And so...
So, and then why opera as a form?
Well...
And where did the project start? And perhaps I know it's very much going to take on a life of its own, and but where does it?
Well, I think the opera, it actually originates from Mark Leckie writing me a letter in response to an exhibition I did in London, but it ended up at the Secession in Vienna. And Mark Leckie was saying, oh, it was like notes to a pedagogical opera. So he came up with that. But it was about this thing of like, where I'm trying to read for you a certain passage of this Polish novel, Ferdy Durka, and and I have these kind of chorus girls, and they're bringing out this text. So the idea was like in the exhibition that there was a conflict between two-dimensional flat graphic work and the notion of an unfolding time-based presentation of thought or whatever. How do you choreograph thought or whatever? So that's the origin of the pedagogic opera. For many years, I had tried to do different manifestations of it. I did this thing called Put a Song in Your Thing, which I did with the dance hall personality from Major Lazer, Scarlet Boy. And so I've been playing and flirting with an opera. I even made these opera costumes, these giant rotary telephones. And, so that's why I was like, oh, my dream project is to do an opera, but not staged opera, like a proper thing, but something more like what Azerbaiján ended up being. I do want to say that in the installation that you can see later, it's not properly installed. It's merely like a way just for you to kind of engage in the content of the work. It's very casually installed, but for didactic purposes. But I think you get the sense it's essentially where the music, it's a Don Giovanni aria where his assistant, I always forget the kind of official terminology of Leporello, is unfolding to the woman that, he's had, 34 women in Portugal, 560 Germans, 320 Italian, so it's going down this like ridiculously long list of affairs or whatever, and so that's the aria that if you know the opera sort of know it well, but the singing parts, the vocal melodies are incorporated into the orchestration. So you just hear the aria, and then you read these conversations that I had. Did you have?
Should we read?
Yeah.
Do you want to read?
No, you.
Okay. I just picked a few. It's a series of 9 conversations, or culled from 9 conversations or 8 conversations, and it's really it's beautiful to read. In fact, so I met a guy from Rome. He called his caso. I guess caso is slang for
penis. But we had been having this whole discussion about Italian and how I don't know Italian. He's teaching me certain words.
So I met a guy from Rome. He called his caso my best thing. No, is an idiot your friend. I don't want to parody an Italian accent. No, is an idiot your friend. Ah ha ha. I'm kidding. And then Francis says, I made a film called My Best Thing. And then it's ah ha ha ha. There's a lot of Francis doing this on the keyboard, so strange.
ASDJLF.
And then he asks, you don't use brushes? And she says, no, not really. You sell your art? Yeah. Damn, baby. And then there's another.
But he says, send me a paper so if you become like Van Gogh, I have a future.
Yeah. But I like this, you don't use brushes, and of course, I think Francis is constantly colonizing different media and thinking about new forms of writing. And then there's another bit that I wanted to flag. So he asks you, so you sell what you make? And she says, yes. And he says, isn't it hard? Like being a whore, selling her own child's. So I actually thought this was a good opportunity for us to think a little bit about promiscuity as a metaphor that comes up in your work. You've compared teaching to giving head to your students. There's a lot of sexual metaphors in this particular encounter because, in a sense, you're putting out as an artist. And so I wonder if we could talk a little bit.
Yeah, I think I had really, I spent a lot of time and effort examining the conditions under which my work is produced and distributed and consumed, and through a kind of feminist lens much of the time. And when I found that I was constantly like, where there was a high degree of promiscuity in the actual production and development of one's own oeuvre or whatever. It's like because of the way the art world was functioning, it's at this moment in history and the way things are. It wasn't like, oh, I'm in a private little room and translating my secret fantasy thoughts into a canvas or what. There was no, it's like you're constantly developing through relationships, through discourse, or dialogues that you have with people who are interested. And so you do a project with a curator, you're with each other constantly, you're having the deepest of moments, and you hang your show and then you never see them again. So there's this kind of incredible, whenever someone writes you a letter, like, can you do something for my journal? And you're like, oh, blah, blah, blah. So there's this, it just feels like you're constantly being solicited, essentially, and in order to sort of continue to exist as a thing, you have to answer. And that's kind of where the telephone costumes came from. It was like, I am my own availability. Like, through my availability, I become who I am. And it was about after that point when I really just like escaped into this other place, sort of unintentionally into this sort of sexual realm, and where all of a sudden I sort of literalized the metaphor, and I was literally promiscuous in that stage. And during that process, I realized, wait, I can't leave my teacher self behind. I'm still here, I'm still the artist, I'm completely concerned with what a person in, Tunisia in an internet cafe thinks about a woman, like, doing what I do. Like, you see my studio in the background of the Skype or whatever, like, what am I? And I think that with the, going back to the university thing, it's like, when the university sort of, I don't want to get into the politics of it, but it was very unsettling and problematic that a kind of Silicon Valley donation could just kind of bulldoze over a field of study as sort of sacred as art. And so I did feel like, wait, what am I? I'm nothing in the world of those metrics. Literally nothing. And so I think that at that time, when I started the project by running into this guy at the skateboard park, and I did this thing called Trapped in the VIP, which is how I met Bobby. I was going on I had a sabbatical, so I had like a time to take off from school and take off from those days where you go into one room for an hour and you give it your all and you have the deepest conversation you can have, and then you walk out and you go in the next room and you do it for an hour, and then you walk out, you go in the next room and you do it for an hour, and then you hurry and eat a burrito, and then you do it for an hour, and then you do it for an hour, and you do. So I didn't have to do that, and we then go to the horrible faculty meetings. But no, I then basically realized that I sort of adopted, Bobby became my 24-hour student in some regard, and there was a two-way street of exchange. And you see, Bobby's actually, he was. Well, anyway, if you were wondering what that weird picture was, that was Bobby sitting on a Schindler church in Compton. We can get to that later.
Yeah, that's Bobby as Waldo. There's actually a lot of things I want to ask, but I thought, there's one thing that I think is always of great interest, to me, and also I think fans of your work, is the way that serendipity, accidents, one thing leading to another. You met this guy in a skate park. He was reading a book called The Art of Seduction, and that's sort of how you found Bobby at some level. You met another guy who was a practitioner of a Jamaican dance hall practice called daggering on a plane. So there's a lot. I mean, can you speak a little bit about your process? And also, it's my first question. My second is, there's this incredible mining of your biography. I wouldn't even say biography, but the stuff that happens to you, but also the stuff that's deep inside of you. And I just wonder how that manifests perhaps in this new project.
I'm just sort of realizing that maybe the sort of all-overness of my life/work has partially to do with the sort of luxury of having been employed within academia, so that I could feel that when I'm going to give a lecture at Princeton, and then with Gavin Brown the next day, where I have pictures of Scarlet Boy, and I'm trying to talk about daggering, and I'm trying to talk about this, like I was giving lectures at Princeton with a picture of this guy I had never met. I see him on the plane on the way home. So that's a kind of freaky thing to happen. And I just was like, hello. He's like, you don't know me. I'm like, no, I really know you. And then we ended up doing this project together, and now he's born again Christian. And he's always on my Instagram like, hey sis, you shouldn't use those words. He's the most charismatic, wonderful person. But so it's like I felt like people fell into I was attracted to something, and then I just, like, by sheer luck, it fell in my lap, and I had to pursue it. And what I learned from him was really profound. And I think the serendipitousness of me. Oh, so what I'm going to say, though, is that this kind of boundarylessness, I feel, is, like I said, is linked to the luxury of being able to be a teacher and to have that stability, that sort of constant flow of young people, kind of challenging you, you're challenging them, you constantly have this back and forth, and then that would allow me, like, everything that occurred in my mind, oh, this is an important thing we're thinking about or talking about, and of course I'll go do a talk, or of course I'll be in a panel about Sigmar Polka, or of course I'll talk about Mike Kelly at PS1, or of course, so I'm just ready out there doing these things just as much as I'm making work. Those things pay you teeny tiny, and work supposedly makes you a lot of money, but that's another conversation. But so I feel that just the way I live my life, and I have the luxury to, like, act on a thought, or if I'm in a public dialogue with someone, I get to pursue it. So there's this kind of amazing set of platforms that I could negotiate between or whatever. And then when the one gets taken away, I refused, I walked away from it because it was really that bad, then you suddenly, you're teaching, understand, where the importance of that relationship. And then I had to understand, like, wait, what is it about this aspect of my practice and the way I spend my time and my dedication to these students and my dedication to my colleagues? What is it about that? Can that exist without the institution? And that's when I started understanding that it's really like a faith. And then that's how, and so Bobby and I kind of came to each other to start to teach each other, and I think he saw me in that moment. So we sort of grasped onto all these kind of religious metaphors, like calling him Bobby Jesus as a joke on baby Jesus, as a way to talk about a sort of Wilhelm Reichian version of the sort of Gnostic Gospels interpretation of Jesus as a political person who's basically just asserting his own manhood, and every man and a woman all should have a heart. There's a certain degree of a kind of gospel notion here, and that relates to the rap part insofar as it's like the street gospel. DJ Quick did an album with this rapper Sugar Free called Street Gospel. So all these kinds of things are kind of flowing in and out, and I'm understanding that I'm taking my sort of, I'm starting to live as a teacher in a different way, and there aren't the compartmentalized things. It always was pretty hard for me to be in a compartment,
right?
But now it's just
even more so. You've described Bobby to me as a student, as a muse, as a collaborator. So I think that collapse of boundaries is really.
But I think for me, it's so the radical part, and as everybody knows who spends time in the art world and who knows artists or isn't artists, one of the hardest things, and Amanda Ross Ho, who's one of my former students, said this recently, and I spend the majority of my time explaining what I do to people and why is it legitimate, And that's kind of part of a lot of the jokes in Observate have to do with that. Like one of them ends like, where the guy says, "You better get back to work," and I was like, "I am at work," and he's like, "Fucking artists,"
Yeah.
you know.
I think we have to wrap up. So one last question. Yeah, no,
This was happening fast.
Because I think we digressed, and in as much as you are comfortable, it'd be interesting to your initial idea for the pedagogical opera. Can you tell us just a little bit about the journey that's taken,
Well,
or maybe it's too early?
no, it's a little hard to say, and I can't really paint a picture for you. But I do have to announce the sad news that DJ Quick did not respond to my invitation, and that was really, really heartbreaking for me. I held out for a while, but by some fluke, and I do feel this is going to actually happen. There's someone who is a pro skater. My son is also a skateboarder. I spend a lot of time. I've invested a lot of money. Skateboarding is significant to me. As a pro skater reached out to me, and we were having a lunch date to kind of talk about something we were going to do together as a project. And by sheer chance, his sister had showed up right when we were supposed to meet. And I had just the night before given a slightly controversial presentation at the Sturtevant exhibition. And he had told his sister about it the night before. Whatever. So we got talking, and I discover that she's a cello player and she works with the LA Youth Orchestra, who are essentially kids from Compton, South Central, East LA. And that her friend that was with her was a conductor, and the last piece that he had conducted was the Magic Flute. So that was like a kind of freakish moment where I felt, and the reason why I bring up the whole skateboarding thing is because what I was trying to do with DJ Quick, it's very specific, whatever, and I have him in other work of mine. What I was trying to do is I was trying to build a bridge between worlds. And Los Angeles is an extremely segregated culture by class, industry, race, etc. It's really weird that way. And so it was like the music industry or the entertainment industry and art, they're not the best bedfellows, but they could be, and I was trying to speak about, here's this person who's the same age as Dre, or no, a little bit younger than Dre, a couple years younger than me, coming out of that thing. Dre's on top of the world, the monopolist extraordinaire, and then he's kind of not. And so I wanted to build this bridge. He didn't build it, but skateboarding, which is a whole other sort of do-it-yourself, self-educating spirit that's very male as well, and someone from that world coming to me thinking, you matter, you're interesting. So I feel like that was like a beautiful gift, and instead of like working with one guy from Compton, I could work with 30 kids from Compton, and hopefully, maybe even at some point, in the next months, maybe if Quick knows that he could come in and work with 30 musicians, he might be like, you know what? Yeah, you're just like some random white girl. I'm not interested in you, but oh my God, 30 kids with instruments in their hands. I could really get into that. So hopefully, maybe it creates an opening for some dialogue to actually happen. But I'm not holding my breath.
Right.
But so we sort of envisioned. We found this Schindler. There's a Schindler church that's actually for sale, which is totally bizarre because every other Schindler thing is, perfectly, revitalized and whatnot. But this one is in pretty rough shape, and it's right in Compton, and it's a church. And so we were thinking about trying to bring a kind of orchestra of young people into that church to and figure out how we would deal with the libretto. That's a whole other can of worms we can't go into.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end and open it up to questions, I guess. Yeah. Surely there's a question.
So you're about to re-encounter a lot of your older work at the Hammer, and you'll install next week. And how do you think looking back at your work through this sort of mid-career retrospective will impact on the new project?
Well, I think it already has, in a way that one of the things that happened is in the very first body of works that you encounter in the exhibition, 25 years worth of work, are these underlined, these annotated piece, marginalia, things that people have underlined in books, and a lot of stuff about reading, and so I feel like a lot of the basic ideas in the earliest work are kind of coming to play in this, and what had happened is, around the time when I was like, okay, DJ Quick's not going to be on board, so that's not going to be the exploration that I expected. But when I was talking to the cello player, I was remembering this project that I wanted to do way back when I first started doing those like the tracings, the repeated phrases or whatever, because I thought of those as little orchestras to make like a, to give a depth, so you have a phrase, like, so there were certain, there's certain things about my interest in reading and writing in space and what that actually means. And so I feel like already seeing the body of work and seeing the kind of the repeating motifs, especially the music stand, that it made me already simplify and think that that I would do a much more straight interpretation of the magic flute rather than a kind of epically sprawling mishmash that is in Bobby Jesus. So something about looking back and seeing these kind of ideas that are recurring over and over and thinking about the opera in relation to my entire arc of aspiration and not just in relation to this sort of traumatic crisis of the paradigm shift of, my position within the academy and what that means for Los Angeles and all of that. So.
I have a question. So we were talking earlier, and you mentioned that Charlie Ray, the artist, referred to your writing as a form of sculpture. And I think a lot of you in the room know that Frances is a very distinguished writer, and at times she's sort of segregated that practice from art practice, and obviously there's a lot of overlap as well. But what's always interested me about your work is how you colonize you sort of cultivate different forms of writing, so from rap to an exchange on the internet, to PowerPoint, to a conversation that you had, etc. So I wonder how does music fit into that sort of continuum, if at all?
Well, it fits in
the
way.
The opera.
It fits in. I just remember this piece I did. It wasn't really an artwork, but it was kind of a lecture, and it kind of started the whole thing. It kind of led to all of this of like animating the text. And what it was I basically took a handful of fall songs because I'm a big fan of the fall, and I really, love Marquis Smith, and he's sort of like a writer that's not a writer, and a singer that's not a singer, or whatever. And I basically, because someone was doing a thing about the fall, and so my presentation was I picked a handful of significant songs, and I had made a PowerPoint with the lyrics, so I was essentially just boink, 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 like doing a kind of karaoke with my fingers so the lyrics would pop up. And I felt like for the person who wasn't a fall fan, but who was in the audience, by being told to look at the words you're also hearing, it's like a pedagogical version of hearing that song. And then that led to doing the same thing with Lady Gaga's and Beyonce's Telephone, is that what it's called? And then from that, like Beecha Kurger saw me do that, was like so into that, and that's how I got the invitation to Venice. So it's kind of, so there is this thing of like reading along as a way to enhance understanding or to pull you in and have an engaged experience. And then when I did a kind of opera in an opera house, it kind of involved these two divertimentos are playing, and then I have a text that's just going on the super text that you just read in the opera, And it was like, but there's no opera going on, but you're listening to music and you're reading the text. And as many of you know who watch a lot of things with subtitles, when you start to read while you're experiencing something, it intensifies the focus, I think.
Right. Paying attention is free. I think a good place to end. Do we have to end? Any questions?